Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Devin Crosby of Lynn University. Leadership is a dynamic occupation that requires vision, excellence, but most importantly, the humility to serve your people on a daily basis. As you lead, make sure to become grounded in something greater than yourself. This will shape your decisions, provide clarity to your team, and cultivate trust. And trust is the foundation of success. Enjoy the podcast.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. This episode of 1Q will be hosted by Brian Blair, Deputy Athletics Director at Washington State University. Take it away, Brian.
Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. This is Brian Blair, and I'm the Deputy Athletic Director at Washington State University. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Also, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review 1Q wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm joined today by Dr. Reggie DesRoches. Dr. DesRoches is the Howard R. Hughes Provost at Rice University. Dr. DesRoches, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I want to dive right in. I mean, you and I overlapped briefly while I was at Rice, and I remember when you got named, my inbox just overflowed with people from Georgia Tech saying, hey, you need to connect with Reggie. You need to talk to him. He's amazing. You guys are so blessed to have him. So you previously served as a longtime FAR at Georgia Tech. You're now the provost for a top 15 university, but you've maintained that passion for athletics. I think your daughter was even recently on Rice's Sweet 16 soccer team. Can you walk us through your role as provost and how you view the value of intercollegiate athletics on a college campus?
Yeah, sure. Provost is one of the least understood positions in the university. I think everybody knows what a president does. Everybody knows what a dean does. A lot of people don't understand what a provost does at a university. So let me just start there and just sort of explain that and get a little bit to athletics. So, as provost, I'm the chief academic officer of the university. And that involves overseeing all the academic programs, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, the research enterprise and our research centers, as well as hiring, tenuring faculty and instructors, overseeing our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for faculty and students. Anything that touches the academic mission of the university is overseen by the provost and their staff. And so it's obviously a great job. It's a great way to really have an impact on the university. And it's been a fun and challenging year in that role so far at Rice. I could just jump into my thoughts on athletics, and clearly I'm a big sports fan. I grew up in New York, always played sports growing up, and followed every team in New York, including the Mets and Jets and Knicks. My family I came from an immigrant family in Haiti, and I think in some ways we found sports as a way to better integrate into the American culture. Even though my dad knew nothing about baseball, in fact, he was an accomplished soccer player. We always watched baseball growing up, watched the Mets, and I carried that into college when I went to Cal back in the 80s. And I remember going to all the football games and basketball games, and I just always loved sports, first professional sports and then college sports when I went away to college. To me, sports is something that connects people, of different races, politics. It's the one time where people come together in unison around their team. I know I can sit at a Met or a Jet game and see things, maybe see things differently, politically, religiously, from the person I'm sitting next to. But for those 3 hours, we're completely aligned around the sport. And so, as far as intercollegiate sports is concerned, I think it adds great value to the university. It contributes, in my opinion, to a well-rounded education at universities. It's something that students rally around. It adds so much to life on campus and a sense of community and unity. And it's a great form of entertainment for students. It's a common way that alumni connect and continue to connect in university long after they've graduated.
Absolutely. And I mean, we can dive into Jets and Mets over Giants and Yankees on another podcast. We kind of glossed over that, but we can circle back. Yeah. I worked at Rice for 7+ years between two stints. And I know how wonderful that place is. I also know it's very nuanced sometimes in the world of FPS athletics. And you worked at Georgia Tech, another highly regarded institution in a major metro. As you think about your role as provost and that combination of FBS athletics, are there nuances and or specific challenges or opportunities that present themselves at a place like a Rice?
Yeah, I would say there are both challenges and opportunities. Certainly, the challenges is both, a place like Rice and Georgia Tech, they're extremely rigorous universities that value academics, push their students hard. And so clearly the challenge for student athletes to try to balance a rigorous major and curriculum with their sport is a challenge. One of the nuances I think for both Rice and Georgia Tech, certainly I remember Georgia Tech, is there really are no places to hide. And I think that's the same place for Rice in terms of there are no easy majors for you to hide into, whether you're a student athlete or not. And so it's really one of those places where it adds an extra challenge for student athletes. I think on the flip side, it enables us to really recruit the very, very best. And I think the coach Brian Lee, who's a new soccer coach, who came from LSU, when he was asked why come to a smaller program, and he said he truly believes he can recruit better student athletes when you have a program that has extremely strong academics. And I think in the short time here, he's proven it by building a really strong soccer program, women's soccer program here. So I think there are challenges, but I think there are also opportunities when you're at places that really stress the academics and push their student athletes really hard.
And I think it's been fascinating for me. Haven't been at a Rice, haven't been into South Carolina. I attended a liberal arts at Wofford, but now being at a major land grant university. And on the surface, those four are very different. But I think, and you touched on a little bit regarding Brian, transition from LSU to Rice, each place has their distinct value or niche within the larger landscape. And there's certainly opportunities at a Rice that avail themselves maybe more so than some of these other institutions. And I think you touched on it with the value of the education as we step into this world of more transfers and some of these other things that are coming at college athletics right now. Do you have additional thoughts on maybe how Rice is positioned when you think about the transfer world or name, image, and likeness, or those kind of topics that are all coming at us at once?
Yeah, I mean, I think time will tell how well Rice is going to be positioned for that. I think Rice is going to have, to some extent, many of the same challenges that the Big Five conferences and others have in terms of what's on the landscape for athletics. In some ways, to a different extent, right? In the sense, again, I think our ability to, particularly in the Olympic sports, to recruit really star student athletes, and we're seeing that in those cases, in those sports in particular, we're competing very well in women's basketball and now in soccer and track and field. I think we have the ability with strong coaches to compete and do very well, both athletically and of course academically. And again, one of the other things, student athletes are incredible in the classroom. I think that's something that's missed by the general population, how well people don't really know. There's this perception of student athletes, but they do extremely well in the classroom. Athletics fosters really important character traits such as work ethic, perseverance, preparation, commitment, interpersonal skills, all these things that will serve student athletes well. And we all know that student athletes, when they go on to their professions, they do extremely well, and they tend to be leaders in their roles. And one of my goals at Georgia Tech and some of the programs I started was to try to find ways to engage faculty with our student athletes. And so we'd have these guest coach programs where they travel with the student athletes, but to give them a real sense of the commitment and the hard work it takes to perform on a Saturday and what goes into that. And I think it really helped change the opinion of student athletes and their role on campus when people saw just the effort that they went through to compete every weekend.
Absolutely. And I'd say that's a challenge and an opportunity for all of us around Division I athletics, and certainly for the NCAA as a whole. So many times these positive stories and then the number of student athletes that come out with these positive attributes and these lessons they've learned, and these opportunities given because of college athletics, that all gets lost sometimes for the negativity. And I get we've got to report all around kind of the story and where we're at. But I think you touched on, in addition to the value of intercollegiate athletics, the value to those student athletes, not only to the campus, but long-term to their careers and those life lessons is a really big piece of why I do what I do. And I think a lot of us do what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We've got a lot of people within college athletics listening to this, but certainly a lot of deputy ADs are kind of the number two in their athletic department. And I think I've heard, and I'd be interested to see if you agree with this, that the provost role or the chief academic officer role is kind of the number two on a college campus. Do you see similarities in serving as that provost role, and maybe what it would be as a number two in athletic department, or really a number two or vice president role for any organization?
Yeah, I suspect there are very similar issues, challenges, and opportunities between being a provost, which is considered the number two at the university, and a deputy AD or any organization outside of athletics. I view these as critical jobs. You're often doing things behind the scenes. It tends to be, at least certainly the provost, an internally focused job. So you may not be out in the limelight like the president is or like the AD is. Often things that a number two does are truly invisible to the general public, but extremely important and critical to the organization. Sort of like an offensive lineman, right? You don't notice what they're doing, but they're protecting the quarterback, and they're critical in that role. And sometimes we have to do the dirty work in these positions. And so I've been in several number two positions throughout my career, and have always used it as an opportunity to learn first and foremost, and to improve myself and to get better. I always try to use these opportunities to work on areas that I know I need to improve if I want to move to that next level. And I always tell people who are academic leaders or trying to be academic leaders that even if you're a number two, you have the opportunity to leave your stamp on the organization. And in my case, I want to leave. When I leave this position at Rice, I want to say I've left the academic enterprise in a better shape and had a lasting impact. And so I hope the assistant ADs out there would who are number twos would really relate to this, and the fact that they can leave their stamp on the organization and hopefully make their mark and move on to the number one position.
I absolutely love that analogy, being a football guy, kind of selfishly, but that offensive lineman of the institution or of the organization, and really doing what's necessary. And you notice it when it's not done well, but when it is done well, you don't see it as kind of invisible, as you mentioned.
Yep. That's exactly.
Across the country, I noticed a lot of provosts becoming college presidents. I don't think it's a misperception by any means that most presidents don't come up through college athletics, right? But it's become, especially at the FBS level, a big piece of that president's plate to manage, to handle, to represent, to be on some of these committees or the like, and working with NCAAs. And it seems like they're more involved than ever. I mean, in your role, as you think about being the chief academic officer and the provost, how do you prepare for what's to come regarding the work in athletics and how athletics represents or is, quote unquote, the front porch of the institution, and managing that?
So, interestingly enough, at Rice, and I'm not sure how it is at other universities, the provost doesn't have an official role with athletics. I do make it a point to meet the coaches so they know that I'm a resource to them on any academic issues or needs they might have, even in recruiting. I was very fortunate that at Georgia Tech, while I was a head of a department, head of a pretty major division, I also served as the faculty athletic rep, as you mentioned early on, for 3 years. And it was a great experience. I had monthly meetings with the president at Georgia Tech at the time. We were required to meet monthly and discuss various issues, and I would update him on what's going on in athletics. And I'd meet with the AD at Georgia Tech monthly also. It's interesting. I would remember the president of Georgia Tech saying that although athletics takes up, I forget what it was, something like 2 or 3% of the university's budget, he probably spent 20 to 30% of his time on athletics. And I suspect that's the case for any Big Five president. And so although athletics is, financially maybe a small part of the university, is huge in terms of the time. So I'm very fortunate that I had that experience to serve as far at Georgia Tech, and also was fortunate to, during my time, to take on the vice president of the ACC role. One of the things that my introduction to athletics honestly had to do with my role in development at Georgia Tech. So as a head of a department, my first introduction was by getting a football suite, as a way of engaging the alumni in the civil engineering department where I was head. And it was an incredible experience. It was great for our alumni. They loved it. It was a way to engage without me having to travel everywhere to meet them. And that's how I really got introduced in a way to the athletic department through that experience. And it really was a great way to build a community amongst the alumni base in that particular program.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a couple great gems there. I mean, one, and I think this is overlooked sometimes, those 6 or 7 home football game weekends at a mini institution provide an opportunity from a development standpoint to bring people together on campus and engage with them. That just it's hard to replicate that on a regular basis. And so those football games, those suites, and what comes with that benefits the entire university. I love those numbers that you dropped from your president at Georgia Tech, that although athletics is 2 to 3% of the budget, they're 20 to 30% of the time that a president may spend on them. And yeah, those numbers may fluctuate from time to time, but I think that hits home this point that although it's a very small piece, and I try to remind myself and our staff and others that we're a very small piece of this overall enterprise, but the opportunity and or damage that can be done, depending on the actions, is really outsized compared to what an institution spends.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And again, from a development perspective, many alumni really connect back to the university through athletics. If you think about all the people that come back, particularly for some of the larger programs, they re-engage with the university primarily through athletics, whether it's football or basketball or other sports. And so it's a significant piece, and it's important to do it well and do it right. And it's an important part of the job for any president.
Absolutely. Let me ask you that. How did you become proficient at your fundraising responsibilities? And I'll ask that question because I know earlier you mentioned a little bit about the role of the provost being very much the things that aren't seen, the internal pieces of the job, but also as a department head or visible member of a campus, that certainly comes with fundraising responsibilities. And I think so often in athletics, your AD has to be out there fundraising, but not all ADs come up through that fundraising track, similar to not many academics come through an advancement track. So how'd you become so proficient in that space?
Yeah, one of the things at Georgia Tech, the development program is very decentralized. So the heads of the departments, in my case, it was civil engineering, have their own development staff and have their own and can access all the alumni of the university, which I think is probably different from other universities. And so early on, when I first became head of the department in 2012, I had a staff and I created a plan and got out there, started meeting alumni all over the country, traveled quite a bit. And then again, the sports, we got that suite that really created a mechanism, and it was extremely popular. You're talking 6 or 7 games. We went to a few bowl games during that time, including winning the Orange Bowl, and being able to engage 20 to 30 alumni in each game was priceless. It really was priceless. But it was really my introduction to development. And to me, development is about building relationships. It's nothing really magical. It's about getting to know people, find out what excites them about the universities, where their passions are, and trying to find alignment between the needs you have as a department or a unit and their passion. And it's really about getting to know people. And that's something I enjoy doing. And it was very fortunate I came in at the right time that we were very successful in our development goals.
You hit on something that I firmly believe, that so much of what we do boils down to relationships, but certainly in the fundraising space, as you touched on, building those relationships, finding out what their passion is, and then matching that to maybe some of the needs of the university. And that's where the magic happens. Kind of that intersection. So I want to end on this question because you became Rice's provost in December 2019. I believe you were the first Black provost in Rice's history. Then in 2020, we turn right to a pandemic. There's this fight for social justice, anti-racism, both of those continuing as we speak. So your first year or so certainly was not uneventful. Can you walk us through experience navigating that during a turbulent period, and how you handle or respond when people ask you questions about being the quote unquote first?
Yeah, I think many of us in these positions are very used to being the first, right? So I was first department chair at Georgia Tech in that department, first Black department chair. I was certainly the first Black dean at Rice, and then, of course, the first Black provost. And so I think we're all very used to the challenges and pressures and in some ways the responsibilities associated with being the first. I came in at a time when we had, in addition to the challenge of being the first and the pressure of COVID and the social justice movement that was just taking place around the same time that COVID was taking place. And I think in some ways, because COVID was here, the social justice pressures came to light even greater because everybody was sort of locked in and locked into what's going on and at home and watching TV. And so I spent the vast majority of my time as provost, that first few months, just working with the president and other leaders to try to find ways to deliver our teaching and research missions as safely as possible. I think one of the challenges we face as Black, Black leaders, when these things happen, what happened with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Dante Wright and many others that was killed that year, is there's an expectation that you have to speak out, and often these things are done from the highest levels, from the president. When you have national issues taking place in university, there's usually a response from the very top, from the president. But when something like George Floyd happens, there's an expectation because of who I am and because I'm a Black man that I need to speak out. And it's interesting. After George Floyd happened, my daughter's a student at Rice. I hadn't responded. A few days went by, and my daughter said, you got to say something. You got to say something. The Black students want you to say something. So I put out a very personal, not from the university, it was really from me, a very personal statement about my experiences with Rodney King, because I was about the same age as she was when Rodney King happened back in the early 1990s. And so that was really the first time I felt I had to be on stage. I had to make a statement, not as provost of the university, but although I was a provost of the university, as a Black man who knows what it's like to have to go through what all Black men have to go through, whether you're the president or anybody of a university.
I mean, the first thing you said really struck me, that you're used to being the first. And while you were talking, I was even thinking about my own experiences in some of these spaces. And I think being the first or being the only, sometimes you become almost desensitized to it in a way, because it happens relatively often. Or speaking for myself, it happens relatively often. But then when George Floyd's murder happened and some of the events of this last summer, you do feel that pressure. But then is it because of your role or your position, and or your title, and balancing those two, right? Because you are used to being the first, but at the same time, there is that expectation and a little bit of pressure, quite honestly, speaking for myself, to have the answer or have the response or represent others' voice. And that can be a little consuming.
Yeah, no, that's no doubt. I mean, there's pressure to begin with being the first, because in the back of our minds, you always think, well, if I don't do it right, they're not going to ever hire another Black provost, right? And not that that's real or not, but that's always a pressure that we tend to face and feel self-imposed, that we are carrying the hopes of not just ourselves, but the hopes of many others. And so there is that pressure. And then obviously you put on top of that what's happening in the nation. It makes it for a challenging year. But I also appreciate the significance of being the first Black dean, being the first Black provost. I remember when I first walked on Rice's campus in 2017. I guess you were still there at the time. I was walking through the quad, and there was a guy coming, a young Black man coming on a bike towards me, and he sort of screeched and stopped and turned around. He said, "Oh, are you the new dean of engineering?" I said, "Yes." "Are you an engineering student?" He said, "No, I'm a humanities student, but we all heard you were coming and we're excited." And so, that just really puts into perspective how important these things are to so many people, and the role that we play as role models in these positions.
Absolutely. I'd echo his sentiments. I think for all of us there at Rice, and even me today, as I watch your work from afar, I mean, there's a certain amount of pride that comes with that, knowing that you're at that type of institution, being the chief academic officer. I think it says a ton about you and your character and in the way you've gone about your work and the value you add. So I take a certain amount of pride in that too, just watching from afar. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on today. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. I enjoyed it too. And best of luck out there. And hope to see you back when you're visiting Rice.
Absolutely. That was Dr. Reginald DesRoches, and he is the Howard R. Hughes Provost at Rice University. And of course, this is Brian Blair, Deputy Athletic Director at Washington State University and guest host for One Question Leadership Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and please remember, stay humble, stay curious. We'll catch you next time.
This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.